I never thought I'd be the guy who writes a post like this, but here I am. A little context before I dive into the madness that is my life. My name is James, I'm 40 years old, and I live in a suburban neighborhood in Michigan with my wife, Lisa, and our 17-year-old son, Tyler. For most of our marriage, I thought we were the picture-perfect family. Stable, loving, and content with our lives. I've got a decent job as a manager at a local factory, and while we weren't rich, we were comfortable. But little did I know, everything I thought I knew was about to come crashing down around me. It all started about 2 months ago. I came home from work a little later than usual one evening, exhausted and ready to relax. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a kid standing on our doorstep. His name was Kyle. I'd seen him around a few times before. He was one of Tyler's friends, and the two often played video games together or hung out after school. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but something about Kyle's expression gave me pause. He looked pale, almost nervous. I figured he was probably waiting for Tyler, so I didn't think much of it. I gave him a quick nod as I walked past him into the house. "Hey Kyle, Tyler's inside, right?" I called out casually. Kyle just muttered something under his breath that I didn't quite catch, but I didn't bother to press him. I had no idea what would soon unfold. I assumed my son was upstairs, probably glued to his Xbox as usual. But as I kicked off my boots and glanced around, something felt off. There was a strange silence in the house. Normally, Tyler's loud music or the sounds of his gaming would be echoing through the walls, but tonight there was nothing. That's when I decided to give him a call. "Hey, Ty, are you home?" I asked, already sensing something was wrong. "Nah, Dad. I'm spending the night at Chris's house," Tyler replied nonchalantly. My heart sank. I knew Kyle wasn't here for Tyler. It took me a minute to fully register what was happening. I walked back toward the front door, where Kyle was still standing like a deer caught in headlights. My mind started racing, and a sick feeling settled in my stomach. Why was Kyle here if Tyler wasn't? And more importantly, why was he acting so nervous? Without thinking, I turned back toward the stairs, calling for Lisa. "Lisa? You home?" I don't know why, but in that moment, I felt this irrational need for her to explain everything to me. Maybe she could make sense of why Kyle was standing on our porch like he was guilty of something. But there was no response from upstairs. Suddenly, everything clicked. Lisa's weird behavior lately, her sudden interest in staying home while I worked late, and her constant workout sessions that didn't seem to produce any noticeable results. I'd brushed off all the red flags, convinced that I was just being paranoid. I was wrong. I turned back to Kyle, who now looked like he was about to bolt. "Why are you here, Kyle?" I asked, my voice much sharper than intended. Kyle stammered, his face flushing red. He looked like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And then, as if the universe couldn't be more cruel, I heard it. The faint creak of footsteps coming from upstairs. I froze. "Lisa!" I called again, but this time my voice was hollow. After a few agonizing seconds, Lisa appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing nothing but a bathrobe, her hair damp and tousled. She looked startled, but not as surprised as I would have expected. It was almost like she knew this moment was inevitable. "James, I can explain," she started. But the look on her face said it all. Kyle mumbled something about needing to leave, and before I could even react, he bolted out the front door like a bat out of hell. I just stood there, my mind spinning as the truth finally hit me like a freight train. My wife was cheating on me, and not just with anyone, with a damn teenager. The rest of that night is a blur. I barely remember what I said to Lisa. I must have asked her how long it had been going on, because she told me, months. She and Kyle had been sneaking around behind my back for months. The kid wasn't even old enough to vote, and yet here he was, sleeping with my wife. She tried to justify it, of course. She said I'd been distant, that she felt neglected, that Kyle made her feel young again. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the woman I'd spent the last 18 years of my life with, the mother of my child, and she was talking about some high schooler like he was her savior. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something, but all I could do was sit there in stunned silence, my entire world unraveling in front of me. And the worst part? this wasn't even the beginning. In the days that followed, Lisa begged for forgiveness. She swore up and down that it had been a mistake, that she'd ended things with Kyle and it would never happen again. She even tried to convince me to go to couples therapy, as if that would magically fix everything. But something inside me had snapped. I couldn't trust her anymore, and I sure as hell couldn't believe that this was just some one-time fling. So I started digging, and what I found made Kyle look like the tip of the iceberg. Lisa had been cheating on me for years. Kyle was just the most recent in a long line of lovers. There was Brad, the guy from her yoga class. Then there was Eric, a coworker from her old job. And let's not forget about the random guys she'd met online. It was like every corner of our marriage had been infected with her lies. By the time I was done, I had a list of names longer than I cared to admit, and the betrayal cut deeper with every new revelation. Facing Tyler was something I dreaded. He idolized his mother, always looking up to her with that mix of admiration and innocence only a son could have. How could I tell him the truth? How could I rip apart the image of the woman he thought of as a loving mother? It felt like no matter what I did, I would destroy his world, and that guilt weighed heavier on me than anything else. One night, after days of dodging him, I couldn't avoid it anymore. Tyler came home from his friend Chris's house, and as usual, he tossed his backpack near the front door and headed toward the kitchen, where Lisa was making dinner. It was a typical, mundane scene, but nothing about it felt right anymore. Everything felt poisoned. I decided it was time. "Ty, can we talk?" I said, my voice betraying the calm front I was trying to put on. He looked up from his phone, clearly confused. Sure, Dad. What's up?" I motioned for him to follow me to the living room, away from Lisa. She shot me a look, knowing full well what was coming, but she said nothing. There was a tremor in her hands as she chopped vegetables, and I knew she was dreading this conversation as much as I was. Once Tyler and I sat down, I could feel the weight of the silence between us. He looked at me with those wide, unassuming eyes, waiting for me to say something. I had no idea how to start, so I just came out with it. "Tyler, there's something you need to know about your mom," I began, my voice cracking just slightly. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my throat tightening as I tried to find the right words. "She's been seeing someone else." The confusion on his face turned to shock, then disbelief. He blinked a few times, like he hadn't heard me correctly. "What do you mean, seeing someone else? Like, cheating?" I nodded slowly, unable to meet his eyes. "Yeah, for a while now. It's not just one person, Ty. There have been others. Kyle, he's one of them." The moment Kyle's name left my lips, Tyler's expression changed. His face twisted in disgust, his hands clenched into fists. "Kyle? What the hell, Dad? He's my friend. That's not possible." "I wish it wasn't, Ty, but it's the truth," I said quietly. Tyler shot up from the couch, pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. "I can't believe this. I can't believe she would do that to you. To me." I could see the hurt in his eyes, the betrayal cutting just as deep for him as it had for me. Maybe even deeper. After all, it wasn't just his mother's betrayal of me. It was the betrayal of him, too. His best friend had been part of it. His entire reality had been twisted and tainted by this one horrifying revelation. Suddenly, he stopped pacing and looked at me. "How long?" "I don't know, Ty. A few months, maybe longer. I only found out because Kyle showed up here when you weren't home." Everything just clicked. The anger in Tyler's face boiled over, and before I could stop him, he stormed toward the kitchen. "Tyler, wait." I started, but it was too late. Lisa was at the kitchen counter, still pretending to make dinner like everything was normal. But Tyler's footsteps echoed through the house like thunder. He was furious, and there was no holding him back. "Mom!" Tyler's voice cracked like a whip as he entered the kitchen. Lisa turned around, startled by his tone, and when she saw his face, her own expression shifted from feigned calm to outright panic. "Tyler, honey, she began, but Tyler cut her off before she could even try to explain. "How could you?" he yelled, his voice thick with betrayal. "With Kyle? My friend, how could you do this to Dad? To me, Lisa's face went pale, and for a moment, she looked like she might faint. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tyler was shaking, fists clenched, his eyes wild with emotion. I thought you loved us. I thought you loved Dad, he continued, his voice breaking. How long, Mom? How many people? Or was it all just a lie? Lisa took a step forward, her hands raised as if to calm him down. But Tyler backed away from her like she was some kind of monster. Tyler, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I felt lonely, and lonely? That's your excuse. Tyler's voice cracked again, and I could see the tears welling up in his eyes. You destroyed our family because you were lonely? I stepped into the kitchen, trying to pull Tyler away, but he was too far gone. He wasn't just angry, he was devastated. Lisa's face contorted with guilt and shame. She reached out to touch Tyler's arm, but he jerked away from her. Don't touch me, he spat, his voice full of disgust. I made a mistake, Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face now. I know I hurt you, both of you, but please, we can fix this. We can go to therapy, talk it out. Talk it out, Tyler scoffed, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. You've been screwing around behind Dad's back with a bunch of random guys and you think therapy's going to fix that? I had no idea what to say. Watching my son unravel like this was more painful than anything I'd felt since discovering Lisa's betrayal. But before I could find the right words, Tyler turned to me. Dad, are you seriously going to stay with her? After everything she's done? He asked, his voice low and broken. I didn't have an answer. After that explosive confrontation, things went from bad to worse. Tyler refused to speak to Lisa for days, locking himself in his room, blasting music, and avoiding both of us as much as possible. The tension in the house was unbearable. I knew I couldn't stay in that toxic environment any longer. So, I decided to confront Lisa about the full extent of her affairs. I had uncovered a lot of dirt, more than I ever wanted to know, but I needed to hear it from her. One night, after Tyler had gone to bed, I sat Lisa down at the dining room table. The same table where we'd once shared family meals, laughed, and talked about our days. Now it felt like a battleground. Lisa, I need the truth. All of it, I said, my voice steady but cold. How many? How long has this been going on? She looked at me with tired, bloodshot eyes. James, please, I don't want to hurt you anymore. Hurt me anymore? Lisa, I'm already shattered. Just tell me the damn truth, I snapped. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. It started a few years ago, she admitted quietly. With Eric. Eric? Your coworker. She nodded, tears already welling up in her eyes. It was after I got laid off. We stayed in touch, and one night, it just happened. I felt sick to my stomach. I'd met Eric a few times. He seemed like a decent enough guy, married with kids of his own. I never would have suspected him of being the kind of man to sleep with another man's wife. And after Eric, there was Brad from yoga, and Mark, and a few others, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper now. My hands clenched into fists under the table. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife had turned our entire marriage into a string of lies, cheating on me with multiple men, all while pretending everything was fine. How many nights had I gone to bed, clueless, while she was out betraying me? But the worst part was, she wasn't even finished. There were a couple of guys I met online too, she added, her voice cracking. It didn't mean anything, James. I swear. I don't know. I was lost. I stared at her, my mind numb from the sheer amount of betrayal. It was like every word out of her mouth was a knife twisting deeper into my chest. All those nights I'd worked late, thinking I was providing for my family. She'd been out with other men, doing God knows what. Despite everything, despite the lies, the betrayal, the years of infidelity, Lisa begged for another chance. She cried, swore she would never hurt me again, pleaded with me to stay and work things out. She promised to go to therapy to make it right, to rebuild the trust she had destroyed. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. But how do you come back from something like this? How do you ever look at someone the same way again after they've spent years lying to your face? After they've shattered the very foundation of your marriage? And yet, part of me still loved her. Lisa's tearful pleas echoed in my mind for days. Despite the overwhelming betrayal, a part of me wanted to forgive her. If not for myself, then for Tyler. He was already devastated, and a messy divorce would only add more chaos to his life. I wrestled with the idea of giving Lisa that second chance she begged for, but every time I looked at her, all I could see were the faces of the men she had been with. It was hard to sleep at night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her with Kyle, Eric, Brad, Mark, each one of them with my wife, laughing at how oblivious I had been. I hated them, but I hated myself more for not noticing sooner. How could I have missed all the signs? The late nights, the strange phone calls, the sudden changes in her behavior. Everything made sense now, and yet, I had been too blind to see it. The guilt was crushing. Not only had I failed as a husband, but I felt like I had failed as a father too. I could see Tyler pulling away from both of us. He hardly came out of his room anymore, and when he did, the look in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. Anger, betrayal, disgust. It was clear that my son wasn't just angry at Lisa. He was angry at me too. I had to decide what to do, and soon. But how do you rebuild something when the foundation has crumbled to dust? While I was drowning in my own turmoil, I didn't realize that Tyler had his own demons to deal with. I started to notice subtle changes in his behavior. He was more withdrawn, and he avoided talking to both me and Lisa whenever he could. He started staying out later, often coming home long after I'd gone to bed. At first, I chalked it up to him coping with the mess we were in. But one night, I came home early from work and found something I wasn't prepared for. Tyler had invited a girl over to the house. Her name was Sarah, a girl from his high school that I vaguely remembered meeting at one of Tyler's soccer games. She was sitting on the couch, her body language tense, and I could tell from the look on her face that something was wrong. Tyler was pacing back and forth, clearly agitated. I stood at the doorway, watching them for a moment before I cleared my throat. "Everything okay here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Tyler stopped in his tracks, turning to look at me with a mixture of frustration and guilt. "Dad, can you give us a minute?" he said, his tone more demanding than I was used to. I raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure, but if you need to talk, I'm here." I left them alone, but something about the interaction nagged at me. When Sarah left later that evening, I could see that she had been crying. Tyler didn't offer any explanation, and I didn't press him. But a few days later, the pieces started falling into place when I found a pregnancy test in the bathroom trash can. It wasn't Lisa's. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, staring at the positive result on the test, my mind racing. Tyler was only 17. He wasn't ready for this. Hell, none of us were ready for this. The last thing I wanted to do was push him further away, but I couldn't ignore it either. The next day, I waited until we were both alone in the house. Tyler was sitting in the living room, scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside of me. I took a deep breath and walked over, sitting down across from him. "Ty, we need to talk," I said, my voice as calm as I could manage. He glanced up, already defensive. "About what?" I held up the pregnancy test, and his face went pale. "Care to explain?" For a moment, Tyler didn't say anything. He just stared at the test, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't find the words. Finally, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Dad, I didn't want you to find out like this. How long have you known?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "A few weeks," he admitted. "Sarah, she's freaking out. We both are. I don't know what to do." I leaned forward, trying to find the right words. "Tyler, I'm not going to pretend this isn't a big deal. You're going to be a father. That's a huge responsibility, and it's not something you can run from." He buried his face in his hands. "I know, Dad, but everything's already falling apart. I can't even deal with this right now. Mom, Kyle, everything's just so screwed up." Hearing him say that broke something inside of me. I realized that while I had been drowning in my own grief, I hadn't been there for Tyler when he needed me the most. He was struggling just as much as I was, and now, with the weight of impending fatherhood on his shoulders, he was even more lost. "We'll figure this out together," I said softly, reaching over to place a hand on his shoulder. "I know things are hard right now, but I'm still your dad, and I'm here for you, no matter what." Tyler nodded, but the weight of everything still hung heavy in the air between us. In the midst of dealing with Tyler's situation, Lisa's behavior became more erratic. She was spiraling, gripped by guilt, shame, and the realization that she was losing her family. She tried to reach out to Tyler, but he refused to speak to her. Every attempt she made at reconciliation was met with silence or outright hostility. One evening, after another failed attempt to talk to Tyler, she broke down. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face, a glass of wine in front of her that she hadn't even touched. "I've lost everything, haven't I?" she whispered when she saw me standing in the doorway. I didn't know how to answer her. In a way, she was right. Our marriage was hanging by a thread. Tyler wanted nothing to do with her, and the life we had built together was in ruins. "Lisa, I don't know what to say," I began, choosing my words carefully. "You made choices that hurt us, hurt me, hurt Tyler. But that doesn't mean everything is over. It just means things can't go back to the way they were." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, her voice trembling. "Do you think we can fix this? Can we fix us?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I do know that it's going to take a lot more than apologies and promises. It's going to take time and trust. And right now, I don't have that trust anymore." Lisa nodded, her eyes full of pain. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, James. Please, just give me a chance." I didn't have an answer for her that night. How could I? A few weeks later, in an attempt to regain some semblance of normalcy, we were invited to a neighborhood dinner party by some friends. It was the first time Lisa and I had gone out together since everything had fallen apart, and the tension between us was palpable. As we sat around the table with the other couples, laughing and making small talk, I noticed Lisa's phone buzzing constantly in her purse. She glanced at it nervously, her hands shaking as she tried to ignore it. Something was off. At one point, when Lisa excused herself to go to the restroom, her phone buzzed again. This time, curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the screen, and my blood ran cold. It was a message from Brad, one of her old flings. The one she had sworn she had cut ties with. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" I stared at the message in disbelief. After everything we had been through, after all the promises and apologies, she was still seeing him. As I sat there staring at Lisa's phone, the noise of the dinner party around me faded into a dull hum. My heart was pounding in my chest, the message from Brad like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe it. After everything, she was still betraying me. All those promises, the tearful apologies, the therapy sessions she had suggested, the talks about rebuilding trust, they were all lies. It was happening all over again. Lisa returned to the table, smiling politely at the guests, oblivious to the storm brewing inside of me. I didn't confront her right away, though. Instead, I sat there, numb, playing the part of the good husband for the rest of the evening. But in my mind, I was already planning my exit. As soon as we got home, I confronted her. I tossed her phone onto the table, the message from Brad still open on the screen. Lisa's face went pale as she saw it, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I can explain," she whispered, her voice shaking. I laughed bitterly. "Explain? There's nothing to explain, Lisa. You lied. Again. You've been lying this entire time." "James, please," she sobbed. "It's not what you think. It was a mistake. I swear, it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "How many times have you said that now? How many times am I supposed to forgive you for the same thing? I gave you another chance, Lisa. I tried. I really tried. But this is it. I'm done. Her tears fell freely now, but they didn't move me. I had nothing left to give her. I was hollowed out, exhausted from the emotional toll of the last few months. I had tried to be understanding, to forgive, but there was no coming back from this. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't tell Tyler where I was going, but I figured he'd understand soon enough. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Every corner of it was tainted by Lisa's betrayal. The memories of our family, the dinners, the holidays, the birthdays, were all overshadowed by her lies. In the days that followed, I rented an apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom with barely enough room to move around, but it was mine. It was a fresh start, far away from the mess Lisa had made of our lives. I kept my distance from her after I left, communicating only through text messages when it came to Tyler. As for him, he was dealing with his own issues. Sarah's pregnancy had thrown his life into turmoil, and I tried to be there for him as much as I could. I wasn't sure what kind of father I could be to him when my own world was in pieces, but I tried. I had to. Tyler didn't speak to Lisa for weeks after I left, and when he finally did, it was clear that their relationship would never be the same. He couldn't forgive her for what she had done with Kyle, and honestly, I didn't blame him. She had destroyed not only our marriage but also the bond between mother and son. Lisa continued to reach out to me, begging for forgiveness, pleading for another chance. But this time, I didn't respond. I had already given her too many chances. I had been too blind, too trusting, and now I was paying the price for it. There was no going back. Months passed, and slowly, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. Starting over never is, but I found solace in the fact that I was free from the lies, the deceit, and the constant second-guessing. I threw myself into my work, into being there for Tyler, into trying to figure out who I was without Lisa. Tyler and Sarah made their own decisions about the baby. They chose to keep it, and while it terrified me at first, I was proud of him for stepping up. He was scared, but he was doing what he could to be a responsible father, something I could respect more than anything. As for Lisa, I heard through the grapevine that she had continued her affair with Brad for a while before he too had moved on. She was left alone, picking up the pieces of her life, much like I had been forced to do. But this time, I wasn't there to help her. One day, while I was packing up the last few things from the house, she showed up unexpectedly. She looked different, tired, worn out, the weight of her actions finally showing on her face. "James," she began, her voice soft, "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for everything." I didn't say anything at first. What was there left to say? But finally, I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I just felt indifferent. "I know," I said simply, "but it doesn't change anything." Lisa nodded, tears in her eyes once again. "I know. I just wanted you to know." With that, she turned and left, disappearing from my life as quietly as she had re-entered it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that there was a strange sort of clarity in the chaos. Life has a way of teaching you lessons you never wanted to learn, and sometimes those lessons come in the form of betrayal, heartbreak, and loss. But in the end, they make you stronger. I wasn't the same man I had been when all of this started. I had changed, maybe not for the better, but certainly for the wiser. I had learned to trust myself again, to listen to the warning signs, to never take things at face value. And most importantly, I had learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means letting go and moving on. Lisa's betrayal had shattered me, but it hadn't destroyed me. And as I moved forward with my life, I knew that no matter what came next, I could face it. Because in the end, I had survived the worst of it. And that was enough. And that's how it all went down. It's been a roller coaster, and I'm still working through a lot of the aftermath. But one thing's for sure. I'm not the man I was when this all started. Life throws curveballs at you when you least expect it, but I've learned that you have to adapt, no matter how painful it is. Thanks for reading, and if you've ever been in a situation like mine, just know that you're not alone. It's rough, but you'll get through it. Trust me,